I honestly think that the market conditions right now are very difficult because I feel like what's true one day, sort of the headlines one day, are completely different than the headlines from the day before. Markets hate uncertainty, and I can't really think of a time in recent history where we've had this much uncertainty for small businesses. Like Trump wants lower interest rates, and I think that he just doesn't think that Powell's going to do it.
Markets are a mess. Headlines flip-flop daily and nobody knows what happens next. But if you feel like you're flying blind, you're not alone. Even Benjamin Cowen, one of the sharpest macro thinkers in crypto, says the signals are broken and the rules keep changing. In this episode, Cowen dives deep into the chaos. He explains why 20% drops in the market might be just noise or a warning. He unpacks how tariffs, recession fears, and Fed indecision are freezing business decisions across the board. And he lays out what all of it means for Bitcoin, interest rates, and the future of financial markets. He even tackles the big question: are we heading toward a 24/7 world where everything from stocks to real estate to gold to crypto becomes tradable all the time? This isn't hopium. It's a sober, sharp take on where we really are and where we might be headed. If you're trying to make sense of this macro madness, this episode is a must-watch. Stick around.
No, I mean, I think normally when you get 20% drops in the stock market that quickly, you're very likely to get, at least from some level of mean reversion. And if the stock market bounces, usually Bitcoin's going to bounce as well. So I think it's mostly that. I honestly think that the market conditions right now are very difficult because I feel like what's true one day, sort of the headlines one day, are completely different than the headlines from the day before. Just going back and forth between, are they going to fire Powell or not? Not that they have the authority to do so, but I'm sure that pressure could be applied in a certain way to really encourage them to step down. So yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it is the market's looking for something good, right? I think it's been trying to find something good. It seems like every time though we get something good, then a few hours later we see more tariff headlines, and then the markets kind of calm down again. So yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of this is just mean reversion, especially after a 20% drop. I mean, there's recessions, right? There are recessions in the past that bottomed after 20% drops, like the stock market bottomed after 20% drops. So you always have to be aware that could certainly be it. But I think a lot of it's going to depend on how long this uncertainty goes on for, right? Because the 90-day pause on tariffs is going to expire, I believe, in July. And that's not that far away, right? I mean, it's really not. And then also you have the China stuff. I think Trump came out and said that the actual tariff percentage would be much lower than like 140 whatever percent. But then as you saw more headlines come out, they haven't really gotten into discussions yet. And it still seems it's a much lower level than actually Trump talking with China. So yeah, I mean, I think the market's looking for something, for anything. And, we're sort of getting some of those headlines, but they're also being walked back a little bit, like a few hours later. So I don't really know what to believe, to be completely honest. Like every time I see a headline now, I don't know. I'm just like, there's a good chance in within less than 24 hours, I'm going to see the exact opposite headline. So I don't know how much weight to put into this stuff.
Yeah, that's very true. But I mean, doesn't that kind of illustrate the really big problem in a way? Like, you as someone who watches markets very closely, a market commentator, if you will, you're uncertain, so you don't know what's going to come. And I guess extrapolate that up to if you're a business, if you're a small, right, medium, or even large or multinational business, what are they thinking at this point in time? Like, I guess it's so hard for them to try and make any sort of decisions in an environment when, as you say, everything could be different tomorrow.
Yeah, I actually know several business owners that I've talked to recently, and I know some of them have had to. They're not hiring because they're just not sure what the future holds. But also, they're not, and the whole hiring stuff isn't just because of tariffs, right? Like that's been a trending thing we've seen for the last 2 or 3 years. But I've seen one of them had sort of like they're either delaying or canceling a product launch because of the where the product is created. It's not created in the States, and like that's gonna negatively affect them. And it had been something they had been planning for over a year and working towards. And yeah, I've just seen, and a lot of the people like they want the tariffs to go down, but until they actually do, right? Until they actually go down, they're uncertain, right? They don't know what to do because the tariff rates keep changing. Markets hate uncertainty, and I can't really think of a time in recent history where we've had this much uncertainty for small businesses. Like it just seems like what are the conditions going to be in 6 months? No one really knows. I think that I think that Trump wants lower interest rates, and I think that he just doesn't think that Powell's going to do it. But I mean, I don't think that. I think with Powell, like you have to remember that the Fed is always reactionary, right? They kind of have to be, because like do you guys remember back in 2022 when everyone was like freaking out over like them raising rates, and there were so many big personalities going on like CNBC and saying all sorts of things about how like they can't raise rates and how there's no way they can raise rates to to these levels. And then it turns out the Fed raised rates to 5.5%, and the stock market kept putting in new all-time highs for 2 years. So it's easy for armchair economists to just kind of sit back and say they have to cut, but they've been screaming that for 3 years, right? And the market, the economy was doing okay for so long. I think the hard part for Powell is that Trump wants him to cut rates, but we don't yet know the effects of all these tariffs on and how it's going to affect inflation, right? I mean, it doesn't really make sense to cut rates a lot if inflation's going to start going back up again, somewhat artificially, just because we're slapping tariffs on all these goods. So I think Powell's in kind of a difficult position right now. If he, maybe if the tariff stuff hadn't happened, then maybe things would be different. But I think it's hard. It's really hard to know. I think they're gonna, as he says, I think they got to stick with the data. I know that if you look at some resources, I think like Rob has mentioned before, Trueflation, I think they're showing inflation has dropped, well below 2% from the last I checked. So I can kind of see both sides, right? I mean, if you're Trump and you truly believe that inflation is over, right, and the prices of everything are coming down, you want lower rates, right? But if you're Powell, how can you risk cutting rates and igniting animal spirits again, especially if inflation is not yet tamed? So I see both sides, but I also think that it would be a mistake to fire Powell. Not that I think they have the legal authority to do so, but I think it would be a mistake. I think that Powell, I think if we have a recession, I would much rather have one with Powell at the head of the ship, kind of steering it, than them replacing Powell with someone who's much more dovish, potentially going into a secondary inflationary cycle, and then maybe repeating exactly what happened in the 1970s, where we had a second wave of inflation. I really don't want to have that. I'd rather just deal with the pain now and get back to 2%, and rather than go through another inflationary cycle. So that's my view. But I can sort of empathize with both sides, but I think that they just got to let Powell do his job, and that's it.
I kind of wonder, are we heading towards a future where anyone is going to be able to buy anything everywhere all of the time? And by that, I mean, stocks, bonds, tokenized real estate, tokenized precious metals, et cetera, on any number of platforms, and perhaps even 24/7, like crypto trades now. So I just wonder what you guys think of that. Is that the future we're heading for, and what might that mean for crypto specifically? Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I probably, as we have more understanding of what they're going to treat crypto as, which, I mean, it seems like they haven't declared them as securities just yet. But yeah, I mean, even on major platforms, we've seen, like even on like platforms like Fidelity or those where you can go buy ETFs, right? You can get exposure to crypto. You're now seeing, I guess, crypto exchanges do the opposite. So yeah, I mean, but in the States, a lot of those platforms will have to, of course, meet all sorts of regulations, which there's only a few exchanges that I feel like meet all these guidelines in the United States to operate. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to just be able to buy whatever, wherever you can, rather than having to, do some business with this one and some business with that one. I hope that's the direction that we're headed. But I'm still not entirely convinced that we're not going to be faced with more, like say like a future administration. I'm not sure that we're not going to face like some backlash for all the meme coin mania that we've had, and maybe them trying to declare cryptocurrencies as something else. But in the short term, I don't really see that as a major issue. So I would like to see more offerings everywhere, and I guess it also sort of suggests that crypto is becoming a little bit more mainstream and integrated into everything. I guess it gives it a little bit more credibility.